All right, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, good thumbs up, perfect. So good evening. Thanks everyone for being here. I was a little worried that it would just be kind of my degenerate friends here, but this is a fantastic turnout, so thank you for coming out to learn a little bit more about internet gaming disorder and just how the industry perpetuates addiction and how we can try and prevent some of this behavior. So my name is Andrew Crumpler. I'm a therapist with the city of Alexandria. I've been in mental health for quite some time. I have a licensed clinical social worker license as well as I'm also a licensed addictions counselor. So I have both the mental health as well as the substance use side and addiction side. I've been playing games for as long as I can remember, since the original Game Boy, Sega Genesis, and have never stopped. And in high school, early college, I also had challenges with excessive gaming, almost to the point of meeting the criteria for this disorder. Quick show of hands, is anyone else in community mental health? A couple? Oh, awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Some of this may sound familiar, and hopefully for those that aren't in this industry, this will enlighten you to some things that are definitely important. So to kind of start with the internet gaming disorder, this is a topic that if you are familiar with the DSM-V, this is at the back of the DSM-V, the appendix, where all of the stuff needs further study. So typically, internet gaming disorder doesn't have a lot of research, and it is based primarily on gambling disorder. So a lot of the criteria for this matches with gambling disorders, and a lot of other process or behavioral addictions. So this talk is not to diagnose anyone. I'm not here to tell you that you have a problem. This is not, I'm not hosting an AA meeting in a bar. Again, this is just to shed some light on how the industry functions, as well as how people can slip into a potentially harmful behavior. So the first criteria that needs to be met is to cause significant impairment or distress in several aspects of a person's life. So this is typically work, school, or relationships. Now, I know this is a wall of text, but these are the criteria for meeting internet gaming disorder. So a preoccupation, and what we mean by this is it's obsessive thoughts. Basically, if you're doing another task, that's all you can think about is this specific game. Withdrawal symptoms, it's going to look a little different from substance use. It's going to be more so the anxiety or irritability, and sometimes sadness when you're pulling away from the game. Tolerance, pretty straightforward, just the need to spend more time gaming to satisfy the same urge. The inability to reduce playing or unsuccessful attempts to quit. So this is a person who says, oh, well, I'm just going to go on for an hour, and then they spend the whole night and kind of going over their limits. Giving up other activities or loss of interest. So maybe they used to run or, play sports and no longer do that. This is kind of how it becomes their only outlet. The next is continuing the game despite problems. Again, this kind of goes back to the relationships. Maybe you're having trouble communicating with friends or family, and it's causing issues. The next one is deceiving family members or others about the amount of time or sometimes money spent on gaming. So a lot of games have loot boxes, and you'll say, oh, I only spent $5, when really it could be close to $500. And then the use of gaming to relieve negative moods, such as guilt or hopelessness. This is very related to substance use as well, is this idea of I'm going to cope with whatever I'm dealing with by using this outlet. Next is the risk having jeopardized or lost a job or relationship due to gaming, right? So we are skipping work. We are no longer communicating with people. It's a pretty big risk. So who is at risk primarily? So anyone can form an addiction to gaming, just like any substance use. So typically the age range of people who game has changed over the years. So it used to be mostly under 18 and 18 to 50, but what we're seeing is a big change in the demographic of older gamers, the 50 plus crowd, who are potentially playing Candy Crush on their phone, right? We've made games so accessible that it's become this point where, okay, I'm going to drop, someone off at grandma's house. They spent 4 hours playing Candy Crush and didn't actually pay attention to kiddo. So we're seeing a lot of that. And if you notice, the average age of gamers in 2004 was 29, and now it's increased to 36. So it has kind of gone up, and really these statistics are just to say that it can affect anyone, and it doesn't really matter about age. So the increase in prevalence is kind of debated. So it could be that, yes, more people are becoming addicted, but it also could be that it is becoming more studied, right? It's this idea that when we start paying attention to a problem, it all of a sudden seems like there's more of the problem. So what they're identifying now is that the highest risk demographic is actually 18 to 29 years old, this identity period of development. And so on average, it does affect male more, or biological men more than female. And this is a 3-to-1 ratio in most places. And again, this is typically because it's not very well studied. Because exceptions in Singapore and South Korea, where this is actually a public health crisis, it shows increased rates of almost a 1-to-1, and that gender or any of that stuff doesn't actually matter. And so the highest rates of internet gaming disorders actually in South Korea. And again, this is because they said it was a public health crisis. They've studied it, and they say about 1 in 5 people have this disorder. Risk factors. These may not come as a surprise to you, but mental health conditions, right? Comorbidity of a lot of these mental health diagnoses are pretty common, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But also talking about low self-esteem and self-worth, right? If someone is at risk for that, they're more likely to develop a negative attachment to gaming. Next is going to be the functional and dysfunctional impulsivity. If we think about how games are made now, it is much easier to get into a game and get started in playing than it was when you had to boot up the game, log in, reinstall. I don't know if any of you have played Call of Duty lately, but installing a 200 gigabyte patch and then having it boot up only to close again. Yeah, I'm not going to play that game. So these games prey on impulsivity. Right? They prey on, okay, if I can get you to the menu and get you to buy something, that's what I want. I wanted to make it as easy and streamlined as possible. The next is going to be the social isolation, right? If we are not feeling connected to the world around us, we're more likely to form that attachment to a game or where we can find other sorts of communication. The lack of social support in the world, again, this kind of goes back to the same thing where we are searching for some sort of connection. And lastly, that game design, which I kind of touched on, but it really does come down to, okay, is this game requiring me to log in every single day in order to get the rewards? Okay, is this game designed to be pay to win, right? Okay, I'm going to spend more money. So it really comes down to kind of those major factors. The mental health piece to this, what we see a lot of the comorbid side, all of these disorders are going to be 70% or greater comorbid. And what I mean by that is you have both, right? You can be diagnosed with both internet gaming disorder and ADHD or anxiety. The highest comorbidity is going to be that anxiety at 92%. So 92% of people diagnosed with internet gaming disorder would also be diagnosed with anxiety. Hopefully that doesn't come as a surprise to people. ADHD kind of preys on the impulsivity, right? Those are people who don't have all the ability to stop or put down, or it is extreme distress if they have to shift gears or change directions. So why are games successful, right? It really comes down to 5 key points in which we try to identify these basic human needs. So the first one being agency, and what I mean by this is control. Like, what sort of control do we have in a video game? And when we boot up a game, can we make decisions? Next is the progress or mastery piece. This is the innate human drive to master a task or skill, right? Infants don't just go around crawling and then they try and stand up. They fall down one time. They don't just give up, right? We have this idea that if we don't master something, we will try harder and harder and harder until we can get that point. And games take advantage of that with achievements, battle passes, all that good stuff. The third one here is identity. For a person who wants to be able to express their identity and can't, they can do that in a game. It makes it very easy. They can play their character how they want. They can talk how they want. They can dress up how they want. Community is another big piece of this. If you think about guilds or if you think about any sort of social interaction in a game, it brings people together. Last one here is safety, right? If we're not feeling safe in our world around us, we're going to seek something that has rules and we can conform to and figure out, and it is predictable. So this idea of agency, right? We have this, if people notice, the first one is Black Desert. People have spent hours and hours and hours just in the character customization screen. And picture 2, your right, is Skyrim, right? If you get overwhelmed by that map, that's probably a good thing, right? That you have unlimited control in this game. You can do whatever you want with minimal repercussions, right? But it's this idea that we can go into a game and choose how exactly we want our hour to be. Progress and mastery, right? We talk about battle pass designs. Okay, log in every day, you have your dailies. Okay, now if you don't reach the certain part of the battle pass, you're not going to get the skin. All your friends are going to make fun of you for not having that skin. We also have this impossible to reach pinnacle for most. So Lost Ark is a game that some of you may or may not know. It's a MMORPG that starts off very, very fast, a lot of progress, very fun, and then it grinds to a screeching halt. And you can pay to get resources and try and push yourself ahead. So again, these games kind of prey on that natural drive for mastery where we want to be the best. We want to achieve the best goal. The next piece is identity, right? So this is a tricky one because recently there's been the big pro gamer, pro streamer, right? I'm going to make this my job. I'm going to develop gaming into this career, which you are more likely to actually become a professional athlete than you are a pro gamer. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first one being that when it comes to money, 98% of the money goes to 2% of the population for pros. The next one being the longevity of games. When we think about how long games have been around versus professional sports, it's not very long. And then you talk into how games are popular. I take Dota 2 for example, right? They had battle passes, they had the international, and all of these tournaments where you would make millions of dollars. And now the prize pool has diminished to a point where it's hardly a career. The next one, which some of you might have seen, but The Secret Life of Ibelin. Show of hands, have you seen? Okay, definitely watch it. It's on Netflix, but it's this story of a kid who was diagnosed with Duchenne's disorder, and he doesn't have any major ability for motor functions. And so he finds this identity in a game where he can be who he wants. He wakes up, he goes into the game, he ends up running for 30 minutes around the game. That's what he does. He has this community, he can be who he wants to be and express himself. And so it's hard to say, okay, is this internet gaming disorder if he's spending 16 hours online, or is this his life? And so it's a tricky kind of dynamic here where if you look at his story, I don't know if I would call it internet gaming disorder. I would call it him trying to develop his life. So community, this one kind of speaks for itself, right? We have guilds, we have this in-game connection. We also, luckily, have MAGFest, right? We have this community that we can build and talk to each other and connect around games. This also is tricky when we're talking about, okay, if I have a scheduled raid every single week, I am now connected to this other people, and if I'm not reaching certain goals, then how am I going to keep up? And so we end up potentially spending more and more time depending on who we're around. And so ideally, we find people who match our schedule, right? We're not going out of our way to meet these other people's schedules because they have their own lives. And there's always going to be someone who has more time than you to game. So identifying that early and recognizing that you don't have to be chronically online. The last one here is safety, right? So the rules, the games are predictable, they're structured. It's very easy to go into a game and know exactly what's going to happen. If I jump off this cliff in this game, is there fall damage, right? So we test the limits and we figure out what's safe and what's not. And when we think about this human desire for order, like, we like structure. We like this idea that the world is safe, and we like that we can go and learn a system. So when we talk about ways to prevent internet gaming disorder and also reduce a lot of the intensity, I'm not here to tell you to stop playing games, right? When it comes to internet gaming disorder, our goal is not abstinence, it is a reduction. Where it is very similar to technology, right? It's impossible to not have technology anymore. It's impossible to not have a phone in your pocket that can have access to the internet or Google Maps. And so for these kinds of addictions or disorders, we have to reduce the amount and find replacement behaviors. So it's very similar with substance use as well, is these replacement behaviors. So for agency, finding ways to take control of our life. So how can we figure out how to find the job we like, or find a community that we like? This progress or mastery, setting goals for ourselves, finding purpose and meaning. This is one that I see the most with clients, right? The purpose and meaning is missing. And so if we can identify what that is in a person's life, they're able to then reach for that progress and mastery. Identity is similar, right? Finding comfortability in that public space. Are we able to be our true, authentic selves in public? And the reality is, for a lot of these people, they're not. They're not able to feel safe. They're not able to express who they are unless it's in a game. Community is a big one, and this is a result of kind of the generation. We have lost what we call a third space. This place beyond home or school or work that is just for being, right? When I was growing up, I would go to the mall with no other expectation. I would just be at the mall. We would just mess around, do whatever. It didn't matter, but it was this third space that we could go to figure out who we are and test limits. So figuring out how to find that for a person is incredibly important. Last one here is safety, right? Finding how to create a space that feels safe. And for teenagers, that may be pretty tough, right? If we're not building that for them, they may seek it elsewhere. And so the good news about all of this is that we are at MAGFest, right? And so we are actually preventing internet gaming disorder by being here. So we are meeting all kind of the criteria, right? We have the safety, we have the harassment policy, we have the agency to choose. You got to choose to be here, right? And we have this community and connection with everyone in this room or around us. We can just pick up and talk with anyone. And we have this mastery or progress by just playing games or walking around or meeting new people. It doesn't matter, right? We're testing these limits and we're becoming better people. And so I do have some references. You can read them. It's really small. But trust me, they're good. Yeah. Yeah. And so that is kind of the end of the presentation. You want to go back? Yeah. References? If you need to move up and take pictures, please do. Oh. Oh, no? You need more picture? Sorry. I saw a lot of phones go down, so I figured. Okay. Questions? I don't know if we have a mobile mic, so David, can you help yell stuff out? Thanks. I'm gonna go I see a black arm that is up. That's all I see. Yes.
I'm a family therapist, and I work with a lot of teens that have a lot of behavioral difficulties and all these other difficulties because they have video gaming addiction. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, and I work most closely with your caregivers, so I'm curious about how parents can support their kids in video gaming addiction and getting through that as a challenge.
Absolutely. So the biggest recommendation is to figure out why they're playing games, right? Is it for community and friendship, right? All of their friends are playing the games, right? So they want to figure out, how can I spend the most time online? So the biggest recommendation is to get with the other parents, right? Figure out who they're gaming with and see if you can set schedules or whatever that looks like. The next recommendation is give the kids a choice, right? There's generally two types of gaming. There's the binge gaming, which is not necessarily bad. And there's also, kind of the incremental gaming, which is an hour a day or whatever that looks like. And giving the kids a choice of saying, okay, if you want to game tonight and you want it to be your, big game night where you spend 4 or 5 hours and stay up late, you are going to need to commit to something else, right? A story I heard was a kid did Taekwondo, and it was this Saturday commitment they had to do every single week. And so the kid could stay up, but he had to go to Taekwondo, and if it wasn't met, that criteria, they would lose his privileges with gaming. And so it is about allowing the kid a choice while also giving them that space, because games are beneficial. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have games. And so allowing them to have both, right? Okay, Saturday is family time, so we're going to spend all day Saturday, but you on Friday night can game, and you have to be present and able to be with us on Saturday. So hopefully that answers the question. Okay, yeah. Right in front.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, notice with addictions, people don't really recommend going fully cold turkey, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So do people who go full cold turkey on any kind of addiction, they tend to fail, or what's the reasoning behind weaning it off, I guess?
Right, yeah. So the question there was about reduction, right? Versus we're not going to go cold turkey on gaming and focused on reduction. And you were asking about the success of other substances or other addictions versus, okay, so good question. Typically speaking, gaming can be a beneficial coping skill, right? And so it can become maladaptive over time, and that's what the push for reduction is. It's this idea that we're not going to completely remove this coping skill, because yes, it can offer you a connection to your friends. It can also offer you this mastery skill. While if it takes away from all these other things, then it becomes an issue. So as far as cold turkey goes, gaming it's not a realistic thing. There's still success in reduction. Harm reduction is a huge model that exists, especially for opioid treatment, where people are taking Suboxone or methadone, right? It's a substance that gives them a similar effect, but also is not as harmful as the harder drug. So we are kind of looking for that, of this piece of, can we reduce to a point, and we're looking for generally it's a 25-cent increment. So going from 100% to 75% to 50% and reassessing every step of the way. Is this meeting our criteria, and is this effective at this point? Well, helpful? We will go black and red shirt.
So you mentioned that there are countries such as Singapore and South Korea wherein gaming addiction is so prevalent that it's been declared a public health emergency. So what is being done by their governments to combat that?
So what is being done by South Korea and Singapore governments regarding this? Not a whole lot. the first step for a lot of these like epidemics that they call is awareness, right? Is building this awareness of like, okay, this is actually an issue. There's a story in South Korea of a person who was in a PC cafe that had died and was dead for 2 days before people around him noticed, right? People might have heard of this, yes. So that kind of is what sparked the whole, hey, this is an epidemic, right? We have people literally sitting next to a person and not being aware. And so they're offering resources for help, but again, when they're identifying a fifth of the population having these challenges, there maybe needs to be more done. We'll go all the way at the back. I see a black sweatshirt maybe. Yeah.
All right, so my question is mainly, what can be done about preventing gaming addiction, with this whole monetization model going to free to play and all this other predatory stuff? Because gaming is basically becoming, deliberately more addicting, so that you spend more time and money into it and stuff like that. So it's kind of like someone making a more addicted alcohol. So
Yeah. So what can be done when the model of games has changed to the point where it's becoming more and more addictive, and they're preying on us, right? That's a great question. It starts with the awareness of the model, right? This free-to-play model, is it forcing you to spend money to enjoy it? And if so, that's kind of where we identify our behavior. If we can stop for a second and kind of think of, what am I doing in this game? Is it giving me the same joy, right? There are certain games where you play and you find the end, right? That's it. You beat the game. You don't have to play it anymore. You can always return to it, but you don't have to play it. There are certain games where you have to spend money to win. And if you're getting to that point where you're spending money to win and you're spending money and it's not bringing you joy, that's typically the point where we have to recognize in ourselves, right? It does take that kind of self-reflection and self-awareness, and maybe people around us as well. Hopefully that answers your question. We will go black shirt here. Yes.
Okay, most identifying feature. Thanks. So you're quitting cigarettes, you start using lollipops, sometimes replacing the bad habit with something else is helpful, like self-addiction. I do not know what an equivalent for attempting to substitute video games might be that might closely scratch that itch to get over that hurdle. Do you have any strategies or replacements that might be beneficial to somebody that is attempting to separate themselves?
Right. Typically we recommend those third spaces, right? Are there ways in which you can engage in the community that's offline, right? Maybe it is you're going and still talking about games with friends, but not necessarily engaging in that behavior that's online. Just getting away from the computer and being around people like we're doing right now does wonders, right? I don't think many people are going to go home this weekend and be like, man, I wish I could play more games for the rest of the time, right? A lot of people kind of get their quote unquote fix, right? But it's this idea of, how can we find these third spaces? How can we engage with other people that isn't necessarily this online game? Hopefully answers question. Yeah. We'll go right here.
I have found for myself that working on crafts, even just simple stuff, like learning very simple crochet or knitting stitches or doing curler bead stuff. There's often at your local library or just in local third spaces, there are people who are very eager and willing to teach you how to do crafts, and that for me sometimes scratches the itch of, instead of going and playing another 3 hours of 14, I'll be like, I should do another couple rows on this shawl.
Yeah. Okay. So the comment here was related to crafts and how we can use crafts as kind of that replacement. And it does bring the similar effect for you. Yeah, that's awesome. Oh wow, a lot more hands went up. We'll go towards the back. I see a mask.
There have been at least a few people who have accused me of having an addiction to gaming. And like basically, the way I've always seen it throughout my life is like I've always viewed gaming as my life's passion. And basically like this is not an intent to ask for a diagnosis or such thing. Like I know that's not what this town is. Basically, like throughout my life, like it's other types of activities just have held most other types of activities have held very little interest to me. And basically, I think what I'm trying to get at, the question is, and forgive me if this is more on the speculative side, but basically, do you believe it's possible to have something as a single-minded focus without it being an addiction?
The question was, do I believe that you can have a single-minded focus without an addiction? And I do believe that is, yes, you can. Addiction, again, kind of going back to the beginning, is that it impairs your life in serious ways, right? So if it is impacting your ability to find a job or to live a productive life, then that's when it becomes that challenge or issue, right? If you are gaming and you're surrounding yourself with different games and it's not doing those things, then it technically doesn't meet the criteria for this disorder. There are lots of people that have singular focuses outside of just gaming, and I wouldn't necessarily call those an addiction either. So, thank you. We'll come up front, red hair first.
What's it called? Are there any like specific treatment modalities specifically for internet gaming addiction compared to that of other like addictions, like say for like substance abuse or stuff like that? Are there any like specific modalities specific only to like internet gaming?
Yeah, so the question was, are there any specific treatment modalities for internet gaming disorder? And the answer is yes. The most common one is going to be cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And then additionally, dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. Those are the two that really focus on behavioral. Because this is a process addiction or behavioral addiction, then those are the most common treatments and forms. There are others, but those are more unique and more focused. But starting with those are the best. I'll go here next.
I've gone through a lot of this journey myself. I like to consider myself a recovered gaming addict, but that's still a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you, if someone is in this room and thinks they might be experiencing this and is debating whether it applies to them, or maybe they're kind of sure but they're looking for resources, what would you recommend they do? I have one I want to offer myself when you're done.
Okay. So the question was, what would I offer, or what would I recommend if a person believes they may be struggling with a gaming addiction? Right? Is that okay? Typically, finding a therapist is the best solution. Online resources, you can look up, how to change behaviors. If you can't afford a therapist, or don't find a good one. I know finding a good therapist is incredibly difficult, and finding one that actually matches your needs. So, yeah, typically if you want to change behavior, it's usually related to using an outside resource to get that. And you had a...
Online support groups have been helpful for me.
Nice.
There's a branch of AA, Internet Technology,
Mm.
Anonymous, ITA.
Cool.
They're good. Also, Smart Recovery.
Smart
Little of a rejection of the alcoholic is top down, but
Yeah.
they're good too. Smart
Okay.
Recovery is the one I go to every week.
Yeah, so online support groups, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. We will go. I see a blue arm up.
So I'm actually a game designer, so this talk is like really fascinating, and
Cool.
that's like something I think about a lot. And like I have two questions. One is from my experience, a lot of time, especially adults who are like struggle with gaming addiction has stuff to do with gamer being their core identity, and the lack of playing game become like an identity crisis. And
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if you have those experiences, and how do you help people where gamer is their whole identity? The other question is, one thing I find recently is we have more now video game gamification system coming from like learning apps like Duolingo's, NFT as like gaming your way, using gaming as a way to riches and fame and retire early,
Right.
as well as like credit card score, and these are all gaming system, a gamification system that is not part of video game. And I kind of wonder if there's any research about how has the introduction of gamification system to real life has impacted that, like does it make people more likely to have a gaming disorder, or does that make people less likely to have a gaming disorder, and how does that impact with the study?
Okay. Yeah, so a couple questions there. Focusing kind of on that, how game design builds into it in all of these different systems. First, there's a reason why internet gaming disorder is so closely related to gambling disorders. And a lot of these new systems are preying on that, and we have to ask, like, who is benefiting? Who is benefiting the most, right? Generally speaking, it's going to be these companies. When I kind of tie back to the Dota 2 tournaments a lot, but they had a battle pass where you would buy, and 25% of the profits would go towards the players, and 75% went to the company. And so they were making millions and millions and millions of dollars, while the players were only seeing a fraction of that. And when we talk about that identity question, that how do we see ourselves, like I would probably guess that everyone in here would call themselves a gamer at some form or another, right? And I think you bring up a good point. When it's our only identity, it becomes potentially challenging. And we want to also say, like, okay, am I a friend as well? And try to identify these other identities. So for me, like, I play sports, I would call myself an athlete. I'm also a gamer, and then I also like to play music, so I'd be like a musician as well. And so I try to find as many identities as possible, because I'm also a therapist in my role. I'm also a friend, I'm also a son, I'm also all of these different things. And when we start to identify ourselves by so many different aspects, it becomes more reasonable for us to exist in different spaces. We'll go to the right side of the room. I see glasses, green coat.
I was wondering if there's any sort of, do you see any sort of difference between like mobile and PC console games? If one's like possibly more addictive than the other. And then I was wondering about like has the overlap between gambling and internet gaming disorder. You see like people have both because of how similar.
So wondering between whether mobile or console/PC is more prevalent with internet gaming disorders. And then the second question, sorry, remind me again.
The overlap between
Overlap.
gambling and
Yeah, overlap between gambling. So it's to start with the mobile piece. Mobile games are generally designed as cash grabs. Right. When we think about how games are designed, I think about like Candy Crush at times, where, okay, you've run out of lives for the day. You can buy more, play more, right? Spend more money. The gacha games are kind of where the overlap exists. Okay, if I spend money, I get loot boxes, and then it's literally you're gambling, right? And then if you can sell those items, then it becomes this connection too of like, I'm going to get the riches, right? If I'm able to use this resource, gaming, as method to increase my wealth, then it kind of overlaps the professional identity as well as the gamer identity. So it can become an issue there. We'll go, I see right here. Yeah.
So a lot of things that you mentioned as the reasons for the development feel like a form of sociopolitical harm, if you will. Like enclosure of third space isn't an accident. It doesn't just happen. And so
Right.
can you speak to a little bit the limitations of individualizing a problem rooted in something larger than an individual and like putting into a diagnosis rather than thinking of other strategies to complement and work on it, like what we're seeing with like South Korea is not really finding ways to go about it and limitations of research and other things in regards to that.
Wow, yeah, a good question. So when it comes to, what we can do about it, I mean, it's awareness first. It's always been awareness first. And I think, what was the first part? Sorry, go over that again for me.
Yeah, like it feels like sociopolitical harm.
Sociopolitical, okay.
Right, like the identity, like
Yes.
searching for safety.
Okay, yes, okay. So the searching for safety piece, right, that third space that you brought up, the loss of that, I mean, we had COVID, which kind of removed a lot of that, but it was happening before that. We had people who were afraid to send their kids outside, and kids naturally will gravitate towards a place where they can find safety, right? They will, if you develop that in your home, they'll be wonderful, they'll experience that. If we have areas around us in which we don't have safety, then what better place than online, right? It's always on, it's always open. We can go to this place where we can speak to anyone at any time. There's always people online, right? There's always guildmates, so there's always these people. And we can try and do a better job of building these spaces. We talk about like what sort of places are open 24/7 besides here, right? You can go anywhere and play any game and talk to anyone. I mean, there may not be people awake at 5 a.m., but you can find someone, right? So kind of going back to that third space, it really is important for us to build those spaces and figure out ways in which we can create.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that the kind of individualizing it as a diagnosis and a problem of the person we're diagnosing kind of misses our focus on something potentially larger?
It can. If I could go around and help every single person, I would. I'm a very individualistic person, and so I have to work on that individual scale. And that's kind of where my change exists. If someone can enact change on a macro scale, please do it because it's necessary. That is not my role. I found my niche in the micro area. So I think if anyone in this room is listening and can enact that change, even at that meso level, that kind of intermediate policy changing, please do it. I don't have the time or energy. So I'll kind of keep doing this kind of thing. We'll go all the way back and towards the middle. Yes. Yes.
Do you think that regulating the games industry would be an effective measure, especially when we're talking about predatory game practices and especially coming to public pressure? Do you think that regulation would be an effective means of trying to combat this?
I personally don't think it would be effective, but only because people will get around that stuff. I think if we could potentially help others, like we're seeing it with like sports gambling right now, where you can't watch a sports game without seeing 700 commercials for gambling. And of course they say, oh, but if you're in New York, check out this hotline in case you have a gambling problem. So like, is that really helping? I don't know. And I don't know if policy change is where this challenge can be solved. We'll go up front.
So I'm coming from this from the perspective of special educator and someone who works in community development.
Mhm.
My question is like compound. So hearing your discussion, it sounds like you're taking a more like person-centered approach coming from like the perspective of a psychologist. My question comes from the perspective of someone who's like in a social worker perspective.
Mhm.
So take for example the diagnosis for internet gaming disorder coming from the APA in 2013 and the WHO in 2018, but then the WHO comes out in 2021 saying that gaming can actually be helpful during COVID, a time where people are like panicking.
Mhm.
So someone's going to read that and go like, hey, that kind of sounds contradictory. Why are you encouraging a practice that you just said 3 years ago is actually harmful?
Mhm.
This kind of feeds into the discussion of like Western medicine, wherein people of marginalized communities are obviously getting little to no access to things like therapy, social work. And so how do you reconcile with the fact that like minorities can't really trust Western medicine 100%, especially in the United States where we have histories like Henrietta Lacks and like the Guatemalan syphilis experiments, things like that.
Mm.
And also, how does looking at it from an individual perspective actually help with it? It's pretty apparent that a lot of this stuff is more so societal expectation, in case I'm going to South Korea. There's also the fact that people are going to go to gaming because we live in a society that demonizes your very existence. So obviously, of course, you're going to develop a gaming addiction because the rest of society said, fuck you.
Mhm.
So like, how do you reconcile that the limited research that exists, especially when like moral panics kind of watered down and diluted reliable research up until I would say 2015, where people in game studies started looking at this from a perspective that actually, treats the subject as a person as opposed to a moral panic.
Mm. So going between kind of the two approaches of the person-centered versus the kind of person and environment versus and societal views, and you bring up great points about marginalized communities and how the distrust in the systems they've been around hundreds of years at this point, right? And so it's hard to say what sort of information is important to pay attention to when there's contradicting information, right? This information is saying that it affects men more than women, but is it actually taking into account all of these different aspects, right? Like South Korea, we're looking at it, okay, why is their rate so much higher? It's because they're paying attention to it. Versus in America, we're diagnosing at 10%, right? So 1 in 10 people that we assess for it. So when we look at that person and environment piece of how can we build the environment around that person in terms of safety, that's going to be the most important part. Right there. Yeah.
I just have kind of a reflection. The human that expressed up there, kind of this idea of asking you essentially what an individual person would do
Okay.
if they worry that they might have some sort of process addiction or addiction in general. And then you essentially talking about the socio-political idea of where does the conversation come in when we're talking about systems, right? Like when we're talking about, and it kind of grinds my gears a little bit when we talk about addictions as a maladaptive behavior, but saying something's a maladaptive behavior is indicating there's a healthy system for people to buy into, particularly disinherited folks, marginalized folks, any person that doesn't look like the norm, right? So my work has kind of taken this direction, that when we talk about this idea of a call to action, addiction is a social problem, right? We're talking about like a social issue. This is something that we are all dealing with. I may be in recovery, but as a whole, like when I enter into society or whatever you want to call this, like glob of what we have here, but when I enter back in, my healing sort of perpetuates out, and the same is true backwards. So the call to action really could be, if we're talking about setting third spaces, we're the answer to that. Like the community is the answer to that, right? So if someone here has this idea of like, oh my God, I'd really like to do this thing in the community, I'm not sure if other people want to show up, I guarantee you show up for that really weird thing you want to do, right? Like I love to read books, and I love to read books with
we come together with each other.
Mhm.
So we are essentially that community answer. We answer that question on our own.
Mhm.
We kind of are on our own, but honestly, that's like the coolest thing ever because we can do whatever we want, right?
Yeah.
So like we're the answer to that question
Mm.
too. Like we create those groups, we make that
Mhm.
space for each other. We come to MAGFest and find somebody who looks like they might need help or someone to talk to. We just do it.
Mm.
Like take that power back, like together as a whole. And it just when that human, and then you mentioned it, and that human up there with the lovely gray hair, I was just like, I have to say this.
Yeah.
This is what I teach. This is what I want everyone to know.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
The answer is community, right?
Yeah.
We do that. No matter if you're affected by this or not, we do that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. You bring up a fantastic point, and there's a great TED Talk about addiction, and it doesn't say that the opposite of addiction is sobriety. It's connection. Yes, thank you. And you're right. This is why we are all here, right? We're avoiding this by being here and connecting with other humans. So thank you for that. Yeah, right here.
I wanted to ask about the qualifications for the diagnosis requiring some sort of detrimental sort of effect of the like social and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you determine if somebody is addicted, especially if they are isolated essentially, whether that be due to lack of third spaces, pandemics, or social anxiety? If people find their communities online, does that count as, like, if they don't know anybody in their physical space, if they rely on people, knowing people virtually, does that toe the line?
Yes. The simple answer, right? But you bring up that fantastic point of like if they have no other like place, that's what they lean on, and it's not necessarily this bad, and it's why this topic needs further study, and it's not this actual disorder yet, right? That it is in the back of the DSM-V for more study, because. And I brought up Evelyn earlier, The Secret Life of Evelyn, because it toes that line, right? He had no other opportunity to do that. And so he found that space in the game, World of Warcraft, right? He found a community and people that he could rely on that literally would fly out to his funeral. And so you're right in saying that it's really hard to diagnose this, and that's why I don't do this diagnosis generally. And if we can take that social anxiety first and manage that, a lot of stuff kind of unravels from there. We're able to identify, okay, well now you can go to this public place and try and meet people that are similar. And so hopefully that answers the question. But yeah.
For the social anxiety
Mhm.
back, if somebody has found a community online, but not necessarily one that they are like individuals that they connect with, like say for like a Twitch chat, for
Mhm,
example,
mhm.
like they find this sense of community, but they don't necessarily know individuals that they like are friends with and talk to. How if they are convinced that that is a real sense of community versus like how to convince them that maybe that is not really a healthy relationship?
I guess I would question, like, for me as a therapist, it's more about like, why am I trying to impose the will, right? Why am I to tell that person that that's not real? It could be totally real for that person, and if that's how they can engage with others, let's start there. If they want to build on that, great. If they're not ready, then we take it slow. Generally speaking, what I want for a person is not what the person wants, and I would love to improve them, but that's not my role. My role is to get them to their goals and what they want to be. So, over here.
So one of the ways I have found like community where I live is there's some trans communities, but there's also meetup.com
Mm.
where
Mhm.
you can like go, this is my interest, this is where I live. But so that's a suggestion, but my
Yeah.
question is, what's a way that we as a community can establish more third spaces?
I'm open to suggestions. There's not many, right?
I do gaming nights in my house.
Oh.
Like, or
Yeah.
dinner, and like I just hang out with my friend.
That's the third space. That's perfect. If we can do more of that and have more nights where you just don't have an agenda, or you just say, hey, everyone come over, let's just hang out, play games, that's totally fine. I do that with my friends all the time.
I have one suggestion for
Yeah.
that question. So I'm coming from this from my own perspectives and that of my kids. Historically, I started a gaming club at my high school because my school didn't necessarily cater well to STEM education. It was more so focused on humanities, which I love. I love history, but it's like I also need
Yeah.
like enact history, and I like doing it through games. So my goal for like my club when I started as a sophomore was to like look at games from an anthropological and historical perspective, as well as a means of entertainment. So we did things like dissecting games from like an economic angle. You know, it's an industry. So
Yeah.
we're going to look at things like, hey, these policies that are being enacted by the gaming industry kind of suck, but at the same time, it's for profit, not for your benefit. And so how do you reconcile that, especially as teens? For my kids, they created a D&D club the year before last, and it has been phenomenal. Over time, it has become student-led. So, like, we completely back off, because my kids are high schoolers, so we want them to not only practice independence for the sake of independence, but it's also because, like, you know, as a person with disabilities, you're going to need to ultimately understand that society as it is kind of against you. And so we're going to give you the framework to work on that through giving you this like, place for RPGs. Case in point, one student, I'm going to say Avery. Avery is kind of like socially isolated due to her history with like going to therapy, not working out. She's been going for like years, both physical and like cognitive therapy. And for her, D&D is a great outlet because it like lets her act out characters, it lets her consider possibilities, and she takes that to heart because one boy in our class, Sam, kind of said some average teenage misogynistic stuff, and she grew up on him. Like, she did not let up, but she also understood that he wasn't necessarily being harmful when he brought it up, he just being a sweet teenager.
Yeah.
So the next week, without us prompting her, she took the onus to go and not necessarily apologize outright for what she did, but to have him take accountability by coming from his perspective, as opposed to outright demonizing and just leaving him at that. So having things like led by the community, creating spaces that are not only like easy to access but are also affordable, which is kind of my pet peeve with like cons as of late, because like the whole Bay Area Bloomberg asking for their places that must be affordable. To put it bluntly, that is kind of towing the line there. We have to actually give $125 to enter, not counting hotel fees. And lastly, learning to like let that particular community that's marginalized lead it itself. We don't necessarily want policies to come and regulate it because those policies are not going to be made with the best interest of the next parts. Case in point, things like access to marijuana. Obviously, like on one hand, it's great that people can use it for things like therapy, pain, and all that. But at the same time, considering the fact that it's still illegal on the federal level, and considering the fact that it still creates policies that are disproportionate to like black people of color, you can't really say policies don't help when it exists specifically to harm.
Thank you. I have time for one more question, so we're going to go right here because I know your hand's been up the whole time.
First impress me real quick, and this comes from someone who works in both family and addiction medicine. Wondering where, this is the place where you find out how to fix it. Like, you got personalities here. Get 10 of us together, we got it. The other part is maybe a little more academic, and it's a short question with a longer version. And do you think that internet gaming or gaming disorder or addiction belongs in itself from DSM, or do you think it's like on the spectrum of true diagnosis to other diagnoses intersecting in this mesh of Venn diagrams with all the other things? You've dealt with this, so where do you think it lives on that spectrum?
Okay, so where do I think it lives on the spectrum from its own diagnoses to comorbidity causing this challenge? Okay. Yeah. I don't know, right? Yeah, it's not exactly. I think it comes down to, I think that you can absolutely use gaming as an outlet for solving the other comorbid stuff, right? Like if you're dealing with extreme anxiety, gaming is a great way to shut off your brain for a little bit, especially when it comes down to like technology addiction. When you open Instagram, your amygdala literally shuts down. Your fear center is gone. And so, of course, we want to do that, right? We want to no longer feel anxiety. And a lot of these apps and companies hire attention specialists. Over the last 10 years, our attention span has gone from 11 seconds to 7 seconds. And so there's this new term that's coming out called like short video addiction. And it's like TikTok addiction basically. But that's being thrown around too, where people literally will scroll for 4 hours on those short things. But I don't know if it's going to be its own thing. I think it needs further study, and I think that it is a real challenge for a lot of people, but there's a lot of stuff. I am at my time, so if you have questions, I can provide my email. Thank you.